For the last 30 years, we have seen an orchestrated effort by the right to undo the New Deal. From the very beginning, Republicans have opposed those efforts to better the lives of the middle class and the poor in this country. When FDR brought about Social Security, it was done without one Republican vote. Their approach was that everything would work itself out if left alone. It was a laissez-faire, a type of economic evolution that took the attitude that if you just left everything alone, the free market would work itself out and everybody would be okay. And you know, this is an easy attitude to have when you're rich, when you have food to eat to the plenty, when the money is no worry. But when you're unemployed, when you don't have food on the table, when you don't know where the next meal is coming from, when your children are hungry, when you're being evicted from your home because you cannot afford the mortgage, when you're forced to sleep on the street, it becomes a whole different thing. It's easy to be callous when you have so much, but when you are without, then it becomes almost impossible. It is the old adage of, before you judge someone, walk a mile in their shoes. And most of these wealthy Republicans have never done an honest day's work in their life. They don't know what it is to struggle. Most of the people today on unemployment or without a job would love to work. They don't begrudge someone who is rich. They just want an honest job that pays an honest wage for an honest day's work. Unfortunately, there are those taking advantage that see this as just a means to get even richer. Being a millionaire isn't enough for these people. Being a billionaire isn't enough. It's how much wealth can they get, even if a little old lady has to go hungry. For the last 30 years, they have tried what they call starve the beast. And their approach was that they said, we know that the country will never go along with us doing away with Social Security. We know that the country will never go along with us abolishing Medicare. We know that the country values unemployment insurance. But we know how we can go about abolishing these underhandedly. And so what they started to do was to raise the debt, spend on anything. And as they spent, they began to say, look, we can't afford these programs anymore. Look at this big debt. The big debt that they ran up. And as we look today, we know that Social Security is sound. And the big lie that it's collapsing is just that, a lie. The CBO has reported that there is enough money to last to 2040. And then there is enough to pay out 75% of all benefits. And all that is based on the assumption that the economy never improves. If the economy improves and people are back working, it can go on indefinitely. And of course, all's really needed to be done is to take the cap off of the level of taxation. Right now, if you make under $100,000, you pay the maximum of Social Security tax. But if you are making $1 million, you only pay on the first $100,000 you earned. It's about time that every dollar you earn be subject to tax. Republicans talk about a flat tax. Well, how about a fair tax? A taxation that says all income should be taxed the same, whether you got the income from dividends or whether you got it by the sweat of your brow. whether you inherited it or whether it was a windfall lottery, you pay the same amount, the same percentage. How about we take and we say, hey, we do away with all loopholes, all deductions, but what we do is we make the first $30,000 you earn invisible. That is to say, as far as the government goes, your taxes don't start till you make $1 over $30,000. And then it starts at something like 5% taxation. And then it goes up every 10,000, 1%. Until finally it maxes out at 75%, which is where it was before Ronald Reagan cut the taxation on the very wealthy. Then there's more than enough money. But the problem is what the Republicans did was to wage unnecessary wars and spend money on military programs that weren't needed, that the military said they did not need, just so they could put the debt to astronomical, skyrocketing amounts. Remember, when Reagan came into office, the national debt was something like under $1 billion. When he left office, it was over $3 trillion. And let's also reflect back to that $1 billion that he inherited. Keep in mind, that debt was the product of the Vietnam War. And all those bonds that were sold to finance that war came due, and that's what put that debt up to $1 billion. Now, like I said, for the last 30 years, maybe even further back, Republicans have been trying to run up that debt so they could kill Social Security, Medicare, unemployment, and for one particular reason. Then they can say, you work for whatever, the rich people can say, you work for whatever we decide to give you. You work until you die. Right now, it's an employer's market, but even that is controlled. We believe in capitalism. We have no problem with it. But we believe in controls. We believe in regulating it. Uncontrolled capitalism says slavery is okay. But the Republican Party was founded on doing away with slavery. They believed in controlling capitalism in the beginning, before that party became corrupted. Now, they want to see a two-tier society, the very rich and the very poor. And they don't want government to do anything to get involved. They don't want any regulation of business. Could you imagine if we did away with all regulations in this country? I'm talking about all laws. You go whatever speed you want. There's no laws against murder, no laws against rape, no laws against holding up a bank. If you can get away with it and you're not shot in the process, hey, you're scot-free. Do you think any Republican would sign on to that? Does anyone think that would be a good idea? I think not. And the same thing goes with our economics. We have to regulate. We have to have laws on businesses so they don't pollute our rivers. They don't poison our air. They don't poison our children. They don't poison us with bad food. This is the role of government. This is what the Constitution lays out when it speaks of the government's role of protecting the domestic tranquility and protecting our national defense. It's not just going to war. It's defending everything. Now, what I wanted to bring up simply in this short video is that Republicans are talking a lot these days about not paying to help stimulate job creation until there's cuts in everything, including Medicare and Social Security. That's their goal. they want to cut away. Well, I say, how about this? How about every Republican sign a pledge that they will not authorize, they will not go along with one more war until there is no national debt. Taxes will be raised, programs will be cut. They cannot wage a war until the debt is totally paid off. Let's track back. Since Vietnam, each war has been a Republican war for profit. Now I know Republicans will tell you Vietnam was started by LBJ. But they lie. For the first troops were put in by Vice President Richard Nixon when Eisenhower was in the hospital incapacitated and Richard Nixon was in control. Richard Nixon said in his biography that it wasn't protests that ended the Vietnam War, it was because the economic support of Wall Street had dried up. They were no longer making a profit because of the protest. We had each war consecutively for profit, especially if you see a war last over a period of time, as we've been in Iraq for over 10 years. How much money was wasted? Let's not put any more money to a war until the national debt is brought down. No financing for Republican pet projects until there is no debt. And to do that, we have to raise taxes. Now they say that never works. But let's look back. Back in the 30s, when FDR came into power, he inherited the Republican Great Depression, which was brought into place by a treasurer named Mellon, who had the philosophy that he wanted to lower taxes to 10% and no more for all the wealthy. He was only able to take it to 25%. But in doing so, he defunded the government, took away regulation, and set up the fall of 1929. And from that came the Great Depression. FDR, to pay for this, raised taxes on the wealthy Americans 744%. If you want to read about this, check out the book, America, Who Pays the Taxes? And from that raising of the tax on the rich and putting things into work programs, we had the greatest growth of prosperity and the greatest growth in the middle class, which lasted until taxes began to be cut by Ronald Reagan. Matter of fact, that golden era of the 50s that conservatives loved to idolize was brought about by liberal policies. I'd say it's time to go back to those policies, to care about the working man and working woman, to make it possible for one person to bring home enough money to take care of their family. We don't begrudge the rich for being rich, but we want to be able to earn a livable income